Hello everybody, how are you doing today? And welcome to my first drawing video. So, this is gonna be the first time I've recorded my drawing in a very long time. So bear with me as I try to work out all of the kinks. So, for this drawing, I am going to be using Dr. P.H. Martin's Black Star waterproof ink, not to be confused with Dr. Martin's boots, because obviously those are shoes and this is ink. Anyway, bad joke. So I am using a traditional dip pen. So basically the pen comes in two parts. There's the nib, which is the metal part at the end that holds the ink, and there's the handle. So I don't know the brands for this because I've had this thing for so long. And as you can tell, I didn't clean it very well. It's actually pretty dirty and has some crusty ink on there. So take care of your guys' pens because you don't want to turn out like me and have crusty nibs. That doesn't sound right. Anyway, so what I'm doing here is I sketched this picture out on some Bristol paper. This is just, I believe, the 300 series Strathmore Bristol. So it's fairly affordable, and you can get it at Michael's with coupons all the time. They almost always have like a 40% off or whatever. So you can get it fairly easily. It's pretty accessible to everybody. And I am just going to start out by outlining everything. So this process takes kind of a long time. And I mean, well, the whole thing takes a long time. So I had to edit this down fairly a lot because this drawing actually took about 4.5 hours to ink completely. So just imagine sitting there for 4.5 hours inking. It's not always that pleasant. Well, sometimes it is, you know. A lot of people say, oh wow, art is just so relaxing. Yeah, it's also very stressful. uh, anyway, so inking this took 4.5 hours. So what you guys are seeing here is actually 10 times speed of what it took me to do this. Anyway, yeah. So for this channel, what I really wanted to do is just show some of my art, and maybe if anybody ever has any questions about how to use a specific medium or how to do specific things, all they gotta do is ask. I'd be more than willing to make a video on it. I do know you how to use many different kinds of mediums, including colored pencil and acrylic, oil, watercolor, gouache, etc., etc. I just work in ink a lot because I have a preference for outline, and I just really love the mark making that dip pens make. And I do use like micron pens and stuff sometimes too if I want to go a little bit quicker. Because dip pen, it really does take a long time, and there's a lot more room for error too, in case your ink releases and leaves a nice large ink blob on your paper that you've been working on for several hours. Yeah, I've had that happen a few times. It ain't fun. So if I feel like I want to get something done quicker, I'll just use Micron. And Microns are great. They're also waterproof. You can go over them with watercolor and stuff. and that's a combination I like to use a lot if I want to add color to my ink drawings. Usually I'll use watercolor. For this one, I thought about adding color to it, but ultimately I decided against it because I'm working on Bristol, and Bristol isn't super absorbent. And while I could put some watercolor on it, if I use a little bit too much water, it could risk pilling up the paper, or the paper will buckle really, really badly. And I mean, you could always flatten it if it does buckle, but I don't want to risk it pilling because I do want it to turn out nice, if I'm going to spend this much time working on something. But this one, I decided to just stick with the black, and then at the end you'll see that I added a background color to it as well because I felt like just the image needed a little something extra. So when I'm doing larger areas of the paper, and right here I really should have busted out the brush, but for some reason I didn't, because I actually pulled up some of the paper with my nib, because if your paper gets a little bit too saturated with ink, if you're going over it too many times, a lot of the times the nib will pick up little flakes of the paper and it'll just make the surface a little bit more rough. A lot of the times you can't really tell unless you're touching the paper, and obviously nobody should be coming up and feeling up your artwork. I mean, that's just totally unprofessional and inappropriate, man. Don't touch people's artwork. Anyway, you don't really want that to happen, and unfortunately I get a little bit carried away, and by carried away I mean lazy. I don't like to change out what I'm using, because to me it's just like, oh, it's a waste of time if I could just keep going, when really it saves you time, because a brush will help you to cover certain surface areas, like larger surface areas, much quicker than the little tiny nib, and they'll make you do it cleaner. So on parts like this that I'm shading in right now, this is always the most stressful for me because I'm trying to get up super close to the outlines on different areas while also maintaining a certain amount of like straightness of my lines. And it's really, really hard to make all of your lines perfectly straight with a dip pen. Not saying that is not possible, like it's totally possible, but for me it's really hard because I have a very shaky, unsteady hand. Like, there's a reason I'm not a surgeon. I'd probably kill people. Also, that's way too much for me to retain in knowledge. Anyway, this isn't a video talking about why I'm not a doctor. This is a video talking about my inking process. And so anyway, processes like this can be very like stressful, and a lot of the times I'm like holding my breath and I'll be like, why am I feeling lightheaded? All I'm doing is drawing, and then I remember that I've been holding my breath for like the past 45 seconds so I don't mess up my lines. Yeah, I can't hold my breath very long without feeling dizzy. Anyway, that's not important right now. So what I'm doing here is I am putting some lines down to map out where I want to crosshatch. So crosshatching is one of my favorite ways to fill in areas with texture when it comes to dip pen. And with dip pen, it can, once again, like if you've scratched the paper too much, you can easily release the ink onto your work, and that's just no fun. That's actually really disappointing. So make sure when you crosshatch that you're very light-handed, because you can always go back in and build up, like what I was doing right there. Just lay down a first layer and then you can lightly go back over it. So I'm just putting everything in one direction right now, like the first layer, and you don't have to do that. Sometimes I don't, I just kind of go for it. But right now that's what I'm doing. I switch it up. You know, I like to change things because do the same thing over and over again, you just kind of get bored. So overall, cross-hatching is one of my favorite ways, and in my personal opinion, the best ways to fill in a gradient when it comes to ink. And I'm sure everybody has like their own preference for this sort of thing. And I'm just talking about like solid black ink for gradient because you can always water down your ink, and I can do that sometime too. I can show you how to do like ink washes and everything to where you can make your gray tones, all your mid-tones and everything all the way down to black. That you'll be using a brush for instead of a dip pen. But as far as making a gradient with just the dip pen, I like to use cross-hatching. You can also use dots, and you can see that too. It'll show when I'm filling in the buckles. Stippling, there we go. It's called stippling. Sometimes words escape me. Anyway, so for now, I'll just let you enjoy some things, and then I'll come back in and talk in a little bit about other certain things, because I don't want to like talk your ear off the entire time. Or maybe I will. Who knows? Maybe if you like these style of videos, I can continue to talk the entire time. So go ahead and enjoy this portion, and I'll come back in a little bit and we'll have another talk about what I'm doing. Okay, so here's where I started to do the stippling, and what you're going to do here is you're just going to slowly build up your dots. What I like to do is actually start with a slightly larger black area. I just build that up in the corners, and then just, you know, you keep poking your little dots all over the place, and eventually you have something that looks like a gradient. It does take quite a while, which is why I prefer cross-hatching. But when you do ink drawings, you really want to have a different array of textures because everything's going to look very monotonous and just kind of blend together if you're using all the same sort of textures and like direction of lines and stuff like that, which you'll be able to see that when I actually ink the rest of the mask in here because I use mostly just the same direction of lines. of hatching, not cross hatching, just hatching. And it looks a little bit monotonous. Words are hard. Anyway, so it can just be pretty monotonous. So what you want to do is practice different techniques when it comes to adding in texture to your drawings. And I can also make a video on that sometime if you'd like to see the different kinds of textures you could do with ink. Also, I want to say here that I'm really sorry my head is in the shot a lot because I kept checking to make sure my head wasn't in the spot, and I didn't check all the way around my camera, and it turns out part of my screen was actually blocked by the camera, and my head was in the shot more often than I thought it was. And you can also see my breathing a lot, so I'm quite a heavy breather. Anyway, so I'm sorry for all of that. I really need to work on my camera angles and trying not to get my head in the shot. And I will work on all of that. All of that will come in time. So for now, please be patient with my head being in the shot and my camera constantly readjusting its focus from the side of my face back to my drawing, because I'll fix that eventually and we'll get a little bit more professional up in here once I've learned how to do things a little bit better. So right here you can see that I've started filling in this area with my dip pen. And then I realized partway into, like, what am I doing? Come on, let's get the brush. And I actually used the wrong brush to do this. I just actually grabbed the first one I saw, which was one of my watercolor brushes. I just wasn't paying attention. I was just like, brush. So this wasn't done very cleanly. This brush wasn't the best one to use. However, it did work. The best kind of brush to use I found for ink is a round sable. And I actually will use a round sable when I fill in the glove and the hood in this picture, but for now I just use this old watercolor one. And then I realized that it wasn't the best. So I scrapped that and then moved back to my pen for now to fill in more texture because I got tired of my lines not being crisp. This area right here was what I was talking about, where I'm just using hatching. I'm not really using any cross hatching. And when you see from a distance, it can look a little bit monotonous. Every time, that word, monotonous. Anyway, so the texture can get monotonous. It's definitely a flavor. You have to like the flavor of the monotony of the stippling, not the stippling. You have to like the flavor of the oh my god. Monotony of the hatching. Oh my god, ignore me. Anyway, but it's a look that I really don't mind, and I do think that there's a place for it in this world. And the place is underneath my hand on my paper. So right here, I'm just going to fill in some more stippling into this area, and I typically like to use this for things that are supposed to be like more fuzzy and whatnot, and right here, mostly I just wanted to change up the texture and really differentiate it from the texture of the sleeve, which was all the cross hatching, to the texture of the mask, which was all just hatching. And I just mostly wanted to change up the texture to add a little bit more depth. Okay, so here, even though it's off screen, it'll be in frame eventually. But this is the sable brush I was talking about. I don't have that particular brush right next to me right now, but I have one of its brothers. It is, what brand is this? Oh, it's Winsor and Newton. Sable round. I think this one is either round 4 or round 6. I have one similar in size right here. Hold on. Maybe it's around 2. Okay, I gotta go check this because it's gonna bug me. Okay, I'm back. I went and I got the actual brush I used for this, which I should have had from the beginning. Anyway, I was way off on the size. So it's a Winsor & Newton Scepter Gold 2 Synthetic Sable number 2 brush. So it's pretty tiny. And I don't think this one was too expensive. I got it on dickblick.com for, oh man, like $4 or $5 maybe? Maybe it was a little bit more than that. I don't know. But I highly recommend getting your brushes off of dickblick.com just because they're so much more affordable than getting them at like a place like Michael's. Even though Michael's has like coupons and stuff all the time, Dick Blick is the way to go, man. I mean, they got the best discounts, including for like paint and everything. And I don't know if it's just me, but it does take a while to get here. And I am in Montana, and so a lot of the times the distribution centers aren't anywhere close to me. So it always just takes a little bit longer to get here. So it could just be to where I live in that sense. And I don't like to pay for fast shipping because in my mind, it's like, oh, it'll get here when it gets here. I don't care. Blah, blah, blah. And then I get really annoyed. Like, why is it taking so long to get here? It's like, oh, yeah, I didn't pay for fast shipping. Anyway, so yeah, that's the brush that I'm using to fill in these particular areas. And it's a lot more accurate than the other one I was using. It still doesn't make like the most crisp of lines. And I don't know if I don't think I recorded it because my battery had died. And that was the second time my battery had died. And so I was just tired of it. And so I plugged in my battery. I cleaned up my lines on here with my dip pen afterwards. So I just went along the edges with my dip pen and filled in the little wavy spots. And that does a good enough job. Like, just fill in the larger areas with the brush and then go back in later and fix the little detail areas with your dip pen because it just makes life so much easier to use the brush, or else you're going to sit here forever. So there actually are like different kinds of nibs. Like the shape that I have is not the only one. I do not know the names of the other ones off the top of my head, but I'll do a video at some point on the different kinds and shapes of nib and what kind of line they make. Most of the time I like to stick with just one shape of nib in my drawings because I don't want to have to switch back and forth between different nibs. I just get lazy, you guys. I get lazy. So what I decided to do right here was I had this calligraphy ink. Let's see, what brand is this? This is Winsor & Newton calligraphy ink in the color Crimson. I don't know if this is waterproof. It doesn't say that it is, so I don't think that this one is waterproof. But I decided that I wanted to add some sort of background color in here because I didn't want the background to just be white. And I knew with this kind of paper and that I wanted to use a smaller brush that it was going to be fairly streaky. That doesn't really bother me with this picture. I kind of like the aesthetic of having sort of a messy, streaky background. And so I didn't try really hard to make the color like an even layout of color. I just sort of went for it, and that just kind of works for me. I'm not okay, so I would say I'm not a perfectionist in my artwork, but there's like different levels of perfectionism. Okay, there's like certain things you absolutely care about, and certain things you couldn't care less about, and having a streaky background, like in a drawing like this, is one of those things that I absolutely couldn't even care less about. And the same with the edges on here too. If I would have wanted nice crisp edges around the border of my drawing, I would have taped it, and so it wouldn't have mattered if I got ink on the tape or whatever, because when I peeled it up I would have had a nice, perfect, clean border. But that just once again came down to laziness, and it's just like, so I can like put it in a mat or a frame or whatever, and all of that will be covered anyway, so I'm just not gonna care about the border at all. So I didn't, that's how it went. I didn't care about the border. I just kind of just went for it. Again, that's like my catchphrase, I just went for it. Anyway, we're coming to the end of the drawing, and I'd like to thank you guys for watching my first video. And if you have any questions or any ideas on videos you want to see in the future, please leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you guys and hear your feedback. And I know this is my first video, so it's not going to be seen a lot, but I'd just like to thank anybody who watched. And I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to see me scribble on some paper. Anyway,